Okay, then, welcome to Space Rocks Uplink. What an absolute pleasure it is to be here. And I'm going to stop that echo and welcome Mark McCorcoran to the show. What an absolute pleasure it is to be back here. And thanks so much to everybody who's joining us from all around the world. Hello, Mark. How are you doing? Are you receiving?
I am. I think so. Yes. There we go. Here we are. Hello.
Fantastic. Well, what a pleasure it is to be, well, I guess rejoined by you after what's been an astonishingly eventful week, and I guess one that that dovetails incredibly well with some of the things we're going to be talking about a bit later. So, just as a quick summary, Mark, I mean, what's happened over the last few days in the world of ESA?
So, if I show my shirt, I've got my Bepi Colombo polo shirt on tonight. People would be right to think I don't own any other clothes except ESA polo shirts, but I have my Bepi one on because Bepi Colombo, a couple of days ago, had its second and final flyby at the planet Venus. So this was a gravity assist maneuver to change the trajectory of Bepi Colombo. It's already gone through one Venus flyby and it's been through an Earth flyby as well. But that's it now on that part of the solar system. And it's finally on its way to Mercury. And in fact, it'll actually be at Mercury in just 7 weeks' time. So it's got big distance to cover. It's going to be moving fast. And in fact, it's going to be moving so fast we can't go into orbit around Mercury at that point. We have 6 flybys to do at Mercury before we finally get into orbit, going around the planet in 2025. So we were taking pictures on board the spacecraft using engineering cameras. The main science camera was cut because it's sandwiched between 2 parts of the stack of spacecraft. That only gets opened up when we get to Mercury. But we were using engineering cameras on board to take images as we flew past Venus. And it was very close. Closest approach was 552 kilometers above the surface. So it's, not too different to the altitude that the space station flies above the Earth. And of course, there's very thick clouds on Venus as well. And we couldn't see down to the surface. We could just see a great white ball. But we got some lovely pictures back at closest approach from going through the night side and then watching the planet disappear. So we made a movie out of that, and we released that today, and we put some music over it, and one of our guests this evening composed that music. So we'll be talking about that.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's an exciting topic, of course, and really central to what Space Rocks is all about, is the interface between scientific exploration and research and the arts, and human self-expression. And I suppose what the combination of those things can do to kind of help to educate and inspire and I guess bring more people, into the fold of all the exciting things that are happening in our world. So tell us a little bit about Aisling, who's also joining, and AVAWAVES.
Yeah, so people know that Space Rocks is a kind of a melting pot where we bring space science and engineers, scientists, astronauts, the sort of technical side of things, and we bring them together with musicians. And we've been working with Phoebe, who's one of our guests this evening, and she is in a band called AVAWAVES with Aisling Brouwer. And Aisling is a composer, multi-instrumentalist, writes soundtracks, and is based in Berlin. She's Dutch and Irish, but is based in Berlin. I think, in fact, this evening she's joining us from a castle in Italy, which we'll see how that works out. And they have a band together. So Aisling is effectively a keyboard player, let's say, primarily, pianist, keyboard player, and many other instruments. But in AVAWAVES, she plays keyboards and Anna plays the violin. And their second album is about to come out. They will remind me of the name of it in a moment, but Chrysalis, I think it is, if I'm right. I'm not looking at any notes, I'm looking right at the camera, so this is out of my mind. They'll set it straight. But that's their second album, and it's coming out soon, and they've got some lovely kind of ambient electronica. Well, it's just very emotional music, and I certainly encourage people to go and look it out. That's AVA and then waves, one word, AVAWAVES.
Indeed. Well, it's powerful stuff, and it contains important messages as well. So I think that's probably where we'll begin as we bring Aisling and Anna into the fold, and we'll check if they're receiving. Hello, Aisling. How are you doing? Can you hear us?
Hey, I'm good, thank you.
Fantastic. And Anna, how are you doing? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Hello.
Great.
Now,
Well, welcome,
what,
welcome
what you
back.
forgot to what you forgot to do, Alex, was actually let me introduce Anna.
Oh, well, go ahead. Go ahead. Go on. Go on.
Anna Phoebe is a violinist, but also a composer. Works on albums, but also on soundtrack stuff, and has been in a whole bunch of bands. Has worked with Jethro Tull, Roxy Music, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. What's the name of the? Is it Oi Voi Voi? Is that what I wanted? Am I saying it right there, Anna?
Almost. Overvoy.
Oh, Voi. Okay.
Overvoy.
Uh, Oi Voi. I'll get there in the end. And we have been working together in the context of space rocks. So Anna performed a piece called No Planet B about climate change, set to images from ESA's Earth observation mission. Performed that with Anil Sebastian at Space Rocks 2, the second big live event in London. And then also played at the British Interplanetary Society, and I think blew the socks off a whole bunch of people wearing suits and ties who didn't quite know what to expect, but it went down extremely well. It was in Belfast, again in 2019. And we even had a single out together last year, meaning I did one tiny little bit of bleep bloop electronics, and Anna made something wonderful out of it with all the music on top of it. So a good friend to Space Rocks, and also played, of course, with Anathema on stage at Space Rocks 2.
Indeed. Well, you could say a bit of a family reunion tonight, then, in that sense. And, certainly a great starting point because, we are talking about the intersection of science and the arts and self-expression. And, Mark and I were talking a little bit beforehand about, what it is that makes the kind of music that you guys make just so very special. And so I put it the floor, but, start with you, Anna, because, of course, we're talking about that night at the British Interplanetary Society Awards and so on. Is it just about setting the right music, composing the right things to the imagery, or is it something deeper? Does it come from a place of really tapping into, I guess, the wonder and the power of scientific exploration?
Well, I think the work with scientists that I've done before, I think in the same way, I can't speak for Ashton, but you probably say the same thing when you're scoring for a film or a documentary. At the heart of it has to be the story and getting an emotional connection, using the music as a way to tell the story and provide emotional connections to what's going on, whether it's on screen or what's going on in the case with scientists behind closed doors in laboratories. And I think definitely for the work that I did with the European Space Agency, the amazing thing that can happen through collaboration is when your whole viewpoint shifts totally on a 180 axis. And definitely before I visited ESTEC in the Netherlands and met Mark, my idea of making music about space science was about the music of the spheres and kind of continuing that tradition of exploring new planets or outer space. And actually, I find the most interesting collaborations are the ones where your own viewpoint totally changes. And that definitely happened with ESA and meeting Mark and seeing that the work that the European Space Agency does, actually a lot of its focus, the Earth observation data is focused on understanding the planet we live in. So I think it's like a two-way process of how the work of an artist can provide a platform for an emotional connection, but it's also, you get so much as an artist, your own your creative work can progress in a totally different way just by meeting scientists and learning about the work that they do.
Fantastic.
And of course, I completely blew it because you were coming to work on space science and the stuff I do, and I managed to turn you over to climate change and the other bunch over in Earth observation. So complete failure from my perspective.
But it was a great 7-hour tour of ESTEC, so I feel like
indeed. Now, so Aisling, you haven't done that direct kind of collaboration as far as I'm aware, but you did score a documentary, was it last year, called Anomaly?
That was
the Bermuda Triangle in space. So this, what we call the South Atlantic Anomaly. So, how much did you know about that going into that? Did you actually do any background research, or did you say, look, there's the images, I just composed to that?
I knew a lot more by the time I was finished with the documentary than when I went into it. That's for sure. Yeah, it was actually right around when the pandemic hit that I was finishing off that documentary. And it was really interesting because, I tend to do films and documentary and TV stuff anyway, but seeing this was like really a true science documentary. And I think it ended up like going to the Science Channel. And so I was sent the treatment, and it was very unlike usual treatment because there was a lot of explanation of actually, you know, what they were talking about and what they were researching and what the science was. And then kind of it was really interesting to, in a way, see it all dramatized, because the goal, of course, of a film is to engage the audience as well and to draw them into the subject and to have them actually, you know, be curious to understand more about the science behind it and not get bored along the way if they don't fully understand what's going on. So it was really interesting to kind of figure out how to use music as a tool to draw the audience in, but at the same time not take away from the subject matter that is actually being, you know, spoken about, or in turn doing too much and then it kind of becomes a pastiche and like you're turning it into a full sci-fi drama. So it was a really fun experience and really interesting. And the director, you know, comes from a science background as well, so he's very knowledgeable. And I think in that sense, I love that crossover between science and music, because I think you actually have, you know, same as Anna did when she went to Belfast, you get to reach an audience that wouldn't necessarily have delved in to either the music or the science and connected in the same way, but you kind of get to create a bridge and let it reach a bigger audience, I think.
Indeed. Well, I mean, I wonder, you know, how the process of composing for a soundtrack is a little different perhaps than writing music for AVAWAVES, for instance, because of course, you know, that marriage is something we've talked about so frequently, Mark and I, over the course of Uplink. I mean, obviously things like 2001 come up, but you know, we also talk about other really brilliant soundtracks. And how is that process different? And I imagine a lot more complex, a lot more I suppose challenging in a way, because you have to marry two things as opposed to simply freely express oneself.
Well, Ash, you've written more to picture than I have. I've always done like short films or worked with artists or worked with, but actually Aisling and I together as AVAWAVES were scoring our first documentary, feature-length documentary. And that's like a great experience for me because I've never done that before. So actually learning the structures and the process, which Aisling has experience of, it's really interesting because we're just starting that process together. And it's well, you can speak about it more probably, Aisling.
I think for me, because we kind of came from different backgrounds in that way, it was also like a kind of a marriage of those worlds and crossing over into each other's world in that sense. And so when we started writing for AVAWAVES, we kind of didn't really know, it wasn't to picture, which was a big change to me because I hadn't really just sat down and written just to have feelings out there. In a sense, it was always like to translate something I was seeing on screen. And so that was, I think, really cathartic for me, at least, and very, interesting experience. But at the same time, I think we both always visualize certain narratives when we are writing together. So even when we're writing for our albums, we usually have an emotion, or it usually comes from like an event or experience or something that's inspired us, and that will kind of spark a conversation. And then it starts off just as friends having a conversation about a topic and how that makes us feel.
I think, I think definitely actually having written 2 albums now as AVAWAVES, like we're so in tune with each other in terms of being able to convey emotions or themes into music. So I think actually like translating that to working with film, just recently when we've gone through it, we're on the same wavelength when it comes to what we think the music needs to be doing to each scene to convey the story. So I think that's actually, being an artist together has put us in good stead for writing together to film.
Mm-hmm.
So Anna, you had performed with, you were a rock chick. I mean, if I'm allowed to say that, or a rock star, right? You're standing on stage with a bunch of, particularly with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, right? Guitars, drums, the whole thing, and there's lots of touring involved. It's not conventional, but it's that kind of a career. And then at some point you sort of said, I want to actually get into this art science thing. So your Between Worlds project started, I'm guessing 3 or 4 years ago. It was before we met. You had been working with biologists and geneticists. What was the spark there? Because that doesn't sound like it necessarily comes from the previous life.
I think definitely in my 20s, I spent my 20s touring around the world with bands, and I've always yeah, that was just like my full-time career was mainly performing. But I think that I've always written music and I've always worked with artists across, like multidisciplinary artists. It's just I never had time to really progress those relationships or that avenue until it was until I had kids really and couldn't do as much touring. And I really kind of had when I was 30, I was thinking about my 20s were all about touring, and that incredible experience of playing with so many amazing musicians and bands and DJs out in the Middle East. And then I made a conscious decision that, okay, my 30s, I want to focus on more studio work and composing work. And that was actually around, not long after that, I met Aisling, who had come from that background. And it's so weird because I was actually thinking, I want to go back. I hadn't really worked with a pianist, and I hadn't worked with that many women because the kind of areas that I was involved in are very male dominated. And literally I was doing a gig at the Indian embassy, and then afterwards this like person strutted up and was like, let's work together. And I was like, who are you? She's like, she's dressed a business, literally had a business card. I was like, composer, pianist. I was like, oh my God, thanks universe. And then we literally went for coffee, and then and AVAWAVES started as kind of like us coming from two different worlds, but really not even thinking of an artist project or this. It was just, we had like a jam session. And so even though I had a specific thing in my 30s, I want to focus on composing and going back to, working with artists, visual artists, and then working with science happened because I wanted to write a choral piece. But really it was meeting Aisling that also was very much part of that whole transition into composing.
And it was so random because I remember I was just asked along by someone at BBC who I'd done work with before, and they were like, it was like a Monday night. It was like, oh, there's this violinist playing that I think you'd really like. Come along. And I just had nothing else to do and been in the studio for way too long. And I was like, yeah, sounds great. Why not? And then saw her perform. And I don't think I'd even necessarily had the thought of like, I want to have another project or I want to start writing and collaborating with someone. It was just purely seeing Anna on stage, and there was just something that I was like, there's something there that I want to know more about what she does and the kind of music she does. And then, yeah, it kind of just all happened out of nowhere.
So before I hand back to Alex, I'm just curious then, because I don't know enough about your background before that kind of work. I'm also thinking of other musicians who sort of are in this, I don't want to call it a genre, that belittles it, but there's a sort of crossover in a sense between contemporary classical and ambient and even some Massive Attack, for example, right? I mean, there's a sort of a broad swathe of crossover there, and I think of people like Anna Meredith, who is a composer in a very classical contemporary, and she's played by sort of serious orchestras, and it's all very, but bluntly it could be what you do, or there's a huge amount of commonality there, it seems to be, musically, sonically. So how do you make a decision in your career which kind of direction to go?
Was that to Aisling?
Well, to Aisling, I think first, because it seems it's a little closer to that. I mean,
in terms of our collaboration as AVAWAVES, you mean? Or
no, you personally, where you came from. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it was ever necessarily a decision. It's funny, like for me, I kind of started off writing for TV a lot, and I think especially when you kind of just enter into the industry, there's this conception that you just need to be able to compose everything and all the moods and all the instruments and just be good at everything. And then actually over time, you realize that that's not human, because no one is good at everything, and also you don't enjoy everything. So I think I started to narrow down, and I don't know why it started going towards the like more dark electronic like side of stuff, but it kind of gradually just did. And then by the time I think that me and Anna started writing together, it was so unprescriptive. Like we hadn't really thought about what we necessarily wanted our sound to be. It was just kind of when we sat down and played together. Yeah.
But that first track you sent me, what was it called again? When we were like, I called Aisling. I was like, the guitarist is called out of a gig. Yeah, and she sent me this track, and I was like, that's kind of symphonic metal. It's really like, it's only like one step away from kind of the Trans-Siberian, like it really was like quite melodic, symphonic, heavy rock kind of thing, even though our AVAWAVES sound then kind of steered away from that and went more sort of electronic or kind of more ambient cinematic electronic. But actually that track, so there was definitely you definitely were tying around with that kind of
no, that's
it was less. I feel like you've only really become gritty in electronic since you moved to Berlin.
That might be true, actually. It's definitely
I think
it's a lot stronger there.
The moment you said, I don't know where I became sort of, dark and electronic, I said, the second you moved to Berlin.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're completely right, actually. That's so true. But
I lived there for 7 years as well. So,
Oh, did you? I love it. Where did you live?
Well, I was working in Potsdam, which is on the sort of far east side.
Yeah.
So it was too far to live in East Berlin, as would have been a little bit more hip. So we actually lived in the most boring, conventional part of West Berlin.
Schlossenberg.
Exactly. Yeah, Wilmersdorf. Yeah. So exactly. So
Wilmersdorf is really nice. Actually.
It's very pretty. It's very lovely.
Yeah.
But it was so I got on a train and then sort of crossed back into East Germany, former East Germany. But but all of my friends said, "You're not cool because you live in West Berlin. We're all out in East Berlin." It's like,
you know what? I've moved to West Berlin recently, and I've kind of made peace with the fact that I'm not cool anymore. But it is very nice.
Yeah. I mean, at some point we were looking to change the flat we were living in, and somebody, said, "Well, I'm moving to East Berlin, so you can have my old flat in West Berlin, and I'm going to the cool place." It's like, fine. If you all want to vacate this part and make the flats cheaper, that's fine by me. It does seem like a bit of a kind of, a bit of an exodus to Kreuzberg and places like that, right?
I mean, I think Kreuzberg in itself is like such a massive area. So like my studio is actually way more towards the east side, and then it's like it's very like Berlin. But then when you go to West Kreuzberg, it's much more like West Berlin. But I think the areas are like constantly changing, and obviously a lot of people have also moved to Berlin in recent years. But to come back what you were saying before, I also was thinking, I think what it was a massive change in music in general is that only since like a few years, or maybe 5 to 10 years, has it become quite normal for film music to become like an artist genre in itself, to perform live and
instrumental music. I remember in my early 20s having lunches with like big record labels who were like, oh, the next Vanessa May, but we're going to put you together with a singer. We can't, because instrument to be kind of successful, you have to. And I really think, I think it's down to maybe not so much with a film, but I think trends are always looking for the next. It was like DJs, and now composers are like the next DJs, and like I'm sure there'll be something else. But I think the idea of people listening to instrumental music, whether it's film genre or not film, soundtrack scores, then I think that is here to stay because of streaming as well. And the way people consume music is very different to how it was 10, 15 years ago. So I think it's changed people's listening habits. And I think people who wouldn't necessarily go to a classical concert are listening to classical music, or that would be in a broad kind of classical genre, which we definitely, classical electronic or classical ambient or classical cinematic, however you want to call it, it's still within a sort of instrumental classical genre.
And I wonder, of course, at Space Rocks, we're very, very down with breaking down barriers and perhaps, approaching things in a non-traditional way. And so I wondered, what kind of parallels there might be with the way that classical music has evolved, where perhaps it's moved away from, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is a very stuffy, very traditional, very rooted in the way things have been in convention. I mean, is that a conscious movement now? Is that something that's really happening, as you described?
Well, I think it's been happening ever since like prog rock. I mean, if you look at Jethro, the mixing of classical music into like the prog genre. I mean, prog was just a catch-all for people who don't fit into any other genre. So I kind of embrace that label wholeheartedly, just because it's such an othering of anything that's not 3 minutes and fits into a Radio 1, but a commercial radio station. So I think there's been a rehashing of classical music since ELP were doing it, Jethro Tull did it. I mean, the list goes on. Yes, that track that's like 8.5 minutes long, Roundabout is these
that's one of the short ones. What do you mean?
That's one of the short ones. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the idea of classical music kind of being reimagined for an audience, for a next generation has always happened. I think over the years since people were plugging in guitars and probably before. But and I think at the moment the idea of cinematic kind of classical music, where it's the Max Richter style or Niels Fram, these people who can kind of take simple ideas, and often it's not about showing off about how many notes you do, which may happen in metal or jazz, but it's about kind of really thinking about structures and textures and building layers and building, and that lends itself to visuals and to screen, you know, and then simple melodies that can be simple but like really touch you emotionally. I think that's the trend I see, you know, now. But people have got short attention spans. So even this new classical genre, sometimes you see 8-minute tracks, but a lot of them are coming in at 2-3 minutes. If you look on, you know, what's being streamed or sort of gets sort of listened to quite a lot. It's interesting, I think.
Indeed. Well, you know, of course, you know, Mark and I abhor prog music. Well, you know, joking completely, but that's the thing, though. You know, I mean, the word prog itself immediately conjures, I think, a lot of ideas about, you know, we talk about yes and so on, but really it's an attitude and an approach to composition, right? I mean, it's about virtuosity, but also space as well. And in some sense, I suppose a lot of what traditional prog fans may not deem prog is actually incredibly progressively minded. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
So I would say that all the artists who I think are pioneers of prog would never say they're prog. Most bands who call themselves prog are the kind of bands that I would never listen to. It's all the ones like Anathema would never say like, oh, I'm prog. It's like Ian Anderson would never say he's prog. Anna Meredith would probably never say, oh, her music is prog, but her music is kind of prog. Like she's challenging, you know, certain notions. And so I think, I don't know, I think that, I think if you define, and usually like people I've met who are like, oh, I'm in a prog band, it's probably I'm probably not going to be that into their music. It's the ones who don't, Genesis probably don't define themselves, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, the classic example is Radiohead. I mean, if anybody's a prog band, it's Radiohead. But it was just utterly uncool to say that, right? And because it got all trapped up in the baggage of what happened, you know, with Rick Wakeman and Ice Skaters and the whole sort of, you know, palaver at the end. And that's excessive. But then, frankly, you know, Marlowe was prog, right, wasn't he? I mean, that's a bit excessive as well. But
Bartok is prog.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, all these labels, they tend to come from outside forces anyway. It's very rare that a band will necessarily categorize themselves. I think often it's that tendency of humans to be like, right, which box do you fit in? Because otherwise I don't understand what to do with this music, you know? And it's that kind of tendency. And then you get called something suddenly and it kind of has a life of its own. But yeah, I don't know many musicians that would. Do you, Anna? That would necessarily.
No, and I kind of think back to like our first album, which was definitely very kind of like an emotional, kind of more sort of classic, less electronic album. And one of our best reviews came from Malcolm Dome, who's like a total metalhead and writes for Prog magazine. So, and I was like, I'm not sure he's going to like this new project. And he absolutely, like, he's such a great supporter of what we do. So it just goes to show, I think, like you were saying, Alex, I think it's a mindset. I think people who, but I think it's not just prog fans who have got an open mindset. I think the rest of music listeners are, a lot of them, the new listeners, are opening up to an open mindset. And as much as streaming is awful in lots of ways, it's amazing in that it is enabling people to have less of an identity attachment to the music they listen to, and they're much more open about experimenting and listen to one bit of this and one bit of this without feeling like they have to commit. And I guess the bad side of that is that you don't commit to buying a CD or a vinyl because you're streaming stuff. But then the good side is people's ears are coming, you know, I'd like to think that people's ears are becoming accustomed to listening to more, you know, different genres of music.
Yeah. I just want to go back to this business about the classical crossover, because the people you mentioned, Niels Fram, Oliver Arnolds and Max Richter, I mean, I listen to a lot of contemporary classical because it's interesting to the ear, and I listen to lots of old classical, let's call it earlier 20th century and previous, but there is, Alex, you pointed out as business sort of the stuffiness, right? The idea that you have to dress up to go, you have to, you know, sit quietly. And actually, we talked about Berlin. It's probably not quite that true in Berlin. I think Berlin has a much more sensible attitude to classical music. I mean, I certainly went there in my jeans and people didn't bat an eyelid. And the opera is the great place where if people don't like what they're seeing on stage, they will just tell the artists in real time. I mean, there was a performance, or I mean, the Berlin audiences are notoriously
So
rude in this
rude.
regard.
Are they?
There was a performance of Bertolt Brecht's Aufstiegenfall der Stadt Mahagoni, which is a very interesting opera. I mean, it's contemporary 20th century. And it was famously the singer, the lead role, the female role, was played by Lotte Lenya originally, and Lotte Lenya couldn't sing, and it was kind of part of the thing that there was a non-singer as the lead role in the opera. And then when we saw it, I mean, when was it? End of the 90s or so. They brought in somebody who was an actress who couldn't sing, and they thought they were doing well. But then the audience at some point, we just couldn't listen. It was just so unlistenable. Somebody, and I think you two certainly speak German, shouted from the back, "Üben," which is German for practice, right? If you're going to be on stage, at least do something to make it, So, but that was
that's a harsh heckle.
Yeah, it was. It was a pretty loud heckle in the middle of an opera hall. But at some level,
what did she do? Did she respond?
No, I don't think she stopped. And I mean, I think
she probably didn't hear it because, like, when you're singing operatically, it's very loud. I mean, even
I wish that was the problem. She wasn't singing operatically. She was singing in the bathtub. I mean, it wasn't very.
She was just in the wrong band. I'm sure there's a band out there that's like there's a band out there for everyone.
Is it a prog band?
No, it was blinking, classical orchestra, right? It was opera, so maybe who knows? There's some of the music my kids listen to. She could definitely sing in one of those bands, but that's unfair. So.
But I do have to say, in defense of Berlin audiences, because I do feel like I have to defend them a little bit. What is great, what I really noticed when I moved there, and there were still lots of gigs going on, is that nobody, no matter what the genre, has their phones out. It's just, and if they do, you'll be told off within a split second to get rid of it. Yeah. And that was actually something also quite nice to see, like really just people being completely in the moment, for better or worse, commenting on the show, but at least very much with it. And it's very casual, as you say. It's kind of like, there's no fitting in or not.
It is interesting, this cultural thing. I mean, Anna, you've played around the world. You must have not exactly struggled with it, but you must have witnessed the different way that audiences behave in different countries. In America, they just talk throughout the entire concert, right? I can't, every time I've been to a gig in America and I lived there, I wanted to kill people. I was like, you come for the music, talk to your friends outside.
I think the most disrespectful audience that I've ever seen was in the desert just outside of Abu Dhabi. And Placido Domingo was performing with the Syrian National Orchestra, and literally, and these people had paid like thousands of dollars to, like, I was opening up for him, but actually it was quite funny because, like, anyway, that's another story. But they were literally they were on their phones, like just talking in the front row, and and you could see, I mean, obviously the ultimate professional, but you could see he was kind of like trying to not be distracted by it, but also it's like it wasn't just that they were taking videos of him, they were actually just having conversations and texting and stuff. And this was like years ago when phones were still relatively new, so it was like a really weird thing to see, because it felt like it felt so wrong, because also he is obviously classical. I think it's I mean, I think you just get used to the idea now. Definitely when I started touring, no one had mobile phones, like, you didn't really see people with their phones out. And I think there's an idea, like, the worst thing you can do after a gig is listen to the board tapes, because you have an idea in your head of the experience of how you felt during a gig, and like the experience of watching it back, or the experience of even listening it back, isn't true to the energy that was in the room. And I think the energy in the room, obviously we haven't had that because of COVID, and that's definitely, like, that live energy is something so special and should be preserved and should be really respected. And I think you do lose that when either you're behind someone and watching it on their screen, or kind of experience it later. And actually, there was one time I saw Keith Jarrett, the pianist. I saw him at the Royal Festival Hall, and he was incredible. But at one point there was someone with a phone, and he stopped playing in the middle of the piece, and kind of, he was like a Woody Allen kind of character, like quite small. It was like, you switch that off. Are you really going to listen to it? And if you do, it's going to sound shit. And he started giving this guy like a hard time. And it was kind of like, whoa. And everyone's kind of surreptitiously putting their phones away. Like, I don't want to be next. But I thought actually he called this guy out, and it is so true. And I'm guilty of it. I'm, constantly documenting stuff, and what for? Like 20,000 videos on my phone that I'm never going to watch again.
Indeed. Well, it's interesting for me to hear it all, because I had a geography teacher I didn't get along with very well. Very sorry, Miss Uribe. But I remember her telling me the strangest thing in the world. This is before digital media, full stop. Maybe 1991 too. Just digital cameras weren't a thing yet. But she said that she'd go on holidays, to interesting places like Egypt and so on, and never bring a camera, because it does change the way you experience things when you have no backup, right? When you're actually forced to look around and enjoy those things, isn't it? And it transforms your idea of the space and just like what you're seeing and absorbing and feeling when you have to remember it, right? I mean, I'm like you, Anna. I have 56,000 at last count pictures on my phone, and most of them are of my cat, but there are like 20 pictures of the same thing because I got to get the perfect thing. And so I wondered if, just sort of, continuing on that theme, the thread of how technology has transformed things. We talked about prog rock. Now, anyone who knows, or even if they don't know anything about prog rock, they might be familiar with something like the Canterbury scene, right? I mean, music and genre and innovation is usually linked with a place. But in 2021, where is that place? I mean, we've been talking about Berlin. We've been talking about other audiences in the world. Is it linked geographically anymore, or is it the ether? Is it this third space?
Ash, what?
Gosh, I mean, I think home has become I don't know. I mean, I think the world has changed so much, in the sense that everything everyone has experienced that used to always be tied geographically, suddenly that wasn't an option anymore, so suddenly that got moved to people's homes, whether it was online or working from home, or trying to experience music from home, trying to see films, never going to the cinema, but everything home. So I think, although I think there is something to be said for the crossover between experiencing a specific location, a specific memory, and the feeling of being there, I'm not sure we have that space right now. I mean, what would you say, Anna?
I think on a sort of more kind of esoteric like side of things, I think that I think the space isn't in like this dimension at all anymore. I think the idea of where I think it's like, if I look at my kids and I look at, there's very real things. If they're climbing a tree, but they already experience, I think all of our reality is so shaped by technology, and it's so personalized to, by algorithms that are subjective. And I think that it's very difficult to find those moments where that is shut out, and where you're just kind of, within yourself. That's not cloud. I mean, it's another reason to like keep your phone off, isn't it? For half the day, if you can manage it, or that moment of relief that you feel sometimes when your phone battery runs out and you're like, oh, suddenly you're alone again. Because when you're constantly hooked up to technology, you're constantly with the ether, you've got access to everything, and it's too much. I don't think our brains can kind of comprehend it. And I think the next generation, they're much cleverer at discerning. Like my kids age 7 and 9 already know that if they're looking at a picture, it doesn't truly depict what their eyes would see. They understand the idea of Photoshop. They understand the idea that your background isn't real. They know how to change. They know. I
can't believe you ratted
No,
him out.
He's there.
Oh, is he actually there? Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
He's from Berlin.
And I'm in space, and I'm obviously in space.
My 7-year-old just texted me and was like, "That's a fake background."
Yes, I have to say, I'm not going to name, but meeting with one of my colleagues yesterday, and she was sitting in her office at work, and I said, "Oh, you're back in the office?" And then she moved. It was home. She'd actually put in her own office as a Zoom background. I thought, no, yeah, you can, I suppose. But
it's also, nothing is real and everything is real. It's like when I clicked on, the YouTube link, I think it was one of the adverts that came for this Uplink. The advert was like you think that you're listening to a real person speak, but I'm not. I'm a robot. But my inflections, I know how to do. And you're like, oh my God, this is so, and the idea that, and part of my, like maybe my gen or just me is like, I'm constantly trying to work out what's real, what's not real, what's, in terms of, news feeds, like right now with like the vaccine and anti-vaxxers and and the kind of dissemination of information, like our brains are working overtime because we're having to really try and work out all the time what's real and what's not real. And maybe there'll be the next generation of humans where either they fully understand it or maybe it doesn't matter anymore. And that's kind of like a weird prospect to think that, does reality even matter anymore? Because I mean, obviously it does.
That's dark though, isn't it? Because then if you tie that back into, say, climate change, then obviously reality will matter very much, because if the reality of that doesn't actually get through to people, then there's real consequences in in many scientific circles. If there's no longer a perception of what is real and what is fake, then actions are not taken that could change the course of things for better or for worse. I mean, I think personally, like the younger generation is just what gives me hope in general. Like they're all just so much more keyed in than at least what I remember being at, as a teenager at that age. And I think, I don't know, like
but if Alex's original question was like, what is the I can't remember actually what your exact question was, but like where is this new space? Like, does it, is it technology? And like, it's a shifting dimension, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, we've come full circle in a way. I mean, because where the thought began was simply, do scenes matter anymore? Does being tied to a specific city mean anything in a genre? Or is it really just this third space? But this is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, just we do dabble in the world of sci-fi on here, and the concepts introduced by people like George Orwell and others come up with alarming frequency these days. It's when you hear that Mark Zuckerberg is investing most of Facebook's future in the metaverse, right? Just like this increasingly commonplace notion that we do not exist in this reality, but in this sort of technological overlay, right? That's really where our minds spend most of their time engaging. And I know exactly what you mean, Anna, when you turn your phone off. You're not switching your phone off, you're switching off a whole dimension of reality, right?
Exactly. And it's a shifting dimension of reality, and it's also a very subjective dimension of reality. So in that case, it's like it's a whole multiverse reality, subjective. But then I think, like Aisling was saying, that allows for potentially very dangerous people to use that as a distraction from what is actually going on, and like real questions that need to be asked, and real action that needs to be taken.
But that is also kind of the problem, because it's all so interconnected. So I think in terms of especially in terms of musical genres and stuff, I don't think location matters anymore, because there's so much connection that is happening online and not physical, that in fact I think that has become the there's almost more of that certainly in the last year happening, where it hasn't been tied to a specific location. It's just people interacting kind of in the digital metaverse.
But we don't want that, right? Because then where do you get like cultural differences, and where do you celebrate cultural diversity as well? If you because that's something that location can give you, is that the historical cultural depth and knowledge of of music that's kind of of indigenous peoples or Celtic music or whatever. It's if we're all just this high street mush of kind of something, then
but I think it's more about the sharing of it, isn't it? I think it's still okay. So yeah, I guess in that sense, it can still be tied to a specific location and a culture and a history. But I think in terms of it reaching the other side of the world, that happens a lot faster, and actually people are much more aware of a much broader range of genres and cultures and languages and histories and political realities and nature from around the world, that previously you would only have access to if you actually were able to go and travel physically. And so I think that has also
Yeah.
changed the perception of what the human race is and what the planet in itself is, and where we step, you know, and what we're actually fighting for, it not just being your country, your village, your city, your culture, but actually also connecting humans on a larger level and saying, actually, we're fighting for everything, and that beautiful mashup of all these different realities, in a sense.
So let me ask a specific question, because it just came to me, and maybe it's too soon, but has anybody written the Great Pandemic album? Has anybody written something which says this is where we are today? This music, because music often expresses that. Right?
I actually disagree. I think everyone's done a lockdown album, like kind of this is where I am, where people have gone, and I think which I think is important, because that's the first step, isn't it? As well, is to be like, whoa, who am I? Like, what is it? And I think people are still processing that. And I think, actually, I was talking to a parent today, and I think, you know, kids, like my 9-year-old had a breakdown the other day about something really small. And it was something that a change in plans. And she was like, you don't know what it's like being a kid living in the age of coronavirus. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, that's like, and it's the idea. And I think we're all from the age of X to X, we're all kind of processing our own lived experience of what the pandemic and what these last 2 years have meant. And I think it's only once you kind of really process that, then you can start looking at the bigger picture, because I think I don't think I'd be able to, like, I don't have the brain capacity to think about, you know.
Also, though, is it possible, do you think, to write the Great Pandemic? Like, from what perspective? Because I think there's always a subjective.
From an alien perspective.
Yeah.
If you're you'd have to be like an alien or something like.
Oh my God, I know who can do it. It can be Luca.
It can be what?
Luca. Luca can do it. As an astronaut, looking in from above, he's got the true perspective.
We'd have to do something clever, like he'd have to give us like specific coordinates, and then we could link that mathematically to musical notes, and then that becomes.
You've made this so nerdy already.
I know, but you know.
I sense a slight tension. Yeah. So maybe not a great pandemic album, but I mean, and it sounds like a weird thing. But in fact, you know, I think back to my childhood when, you know, there was clearly a very strong musical reflection of the difficulties of the 1970s in the UK. There was a lot of kind of, you know, partly through punk making it accessible for anybody to make music in a way. When we talked about prog before, you know, you had to be proficient, you had to have a big tour, you know, it wasn't easy to just come up from the street, and that was part of the reclaiming that punk made. But there was a lot of anger, and a lot of it was linked to, a little bit later, it was linked to Thatcher, it was linked to the closing of mines. You know, we live in those weird times again. I mean, maybe we've never moved out of them, but there's an awful lot of problems in the world. I mean, did a great album come out of the 4 years of Trump? Maybe. I mean, maybe I just wasn't paying attention.
It's weird, isn't it? Because I think there are so many artists, especially mainstream artists, who just refuse to be political. And I also kind of think, remember where our first album was kind of written in the wake of Brexit, and we'd get these questions like, so is your album like an anti-Brexit album? And I'm kind of thinking, well, we wrote it in the wake of. But no, if I was writing an album about Brexit, it would be punk, and it'd be thrash metal. It wouldn't be kind of ambient, melodic, ambient classical music. But I think you're right in that. I think it's like, where are the sort of angry voice? I mean, there are people who continually challenge with lyrics what's going on, and I think that's like, you know, that's definitely aspirational, isn't it? To try and use art as a way to not only process what's going on, which means, you know, looking inward, but also reflecting what's going on in society. And you know, we may have to like change our genre somewhat, or definitely bring in a little bit more of that gritty, electronic, angry Berlin style, because, you know,
truer to ourselves.
Yeah, it would be an interesting sounding album, wouldn't it? Like what is the sound of the pandemic? But also, like Aisling said, you know, who are we to write that? I think the idea, like, you know, two white privileged women in Western Europe, like, are we the people to really say what the experience of the pandemic is? I probably would say no, and like I'd want to maybe facilitate someone else, or like make sure I buy their album, because I don't know if I'm the best person to be a commentator for that.
Yeah, well, but I think, as you say, I mean, no one has the definitive experience of this thing, right? You know, because we've all kind of fragmented in this way that, I suppose we've never really seen before as a society, perhaps because so many of us have been able to lock down in the way that we have. But it's interesting because we had a couple of guests on a few weeks ago, Jeff Manott and Nicola Twilley, who wrote a book called Until Proven Safe, and it was all about the history and future of quarantine, and we kind of explored this whole idea, which is, why haven't we learned from the past? Why is it that, the whole concept of quarantine goes back to, I think, 14th century Venice, Mark, with the actual creation of the concept of quarantine, based on 40 days. And they said, well, one of the reasons is because there's very little archaeology when it comes to it all, because pretty much all the places where people isolated has been torn down, and people just moved quickly to forget about these things. And so it was almost like they didn't want to dwell on those experiences, and they just moved on very, very quickly. And it's just this thing that seems to happen time and time again, even with influenza 100 years ago. And so I do wonder if after this mass trauma, assuming that, it diminishes or concludes, I obviously hope for the latter, maybe it will simply be that, we again induce this kind of mass amnesia because we can, because we've experienced it, and we're allowing ourselves to move on. So I guess who can say?
I think it's
people are already talking about, the new roaring 20s, and it's like the last thing we need is a roaring 20s, because we have another problem which we have to face, right? So, but I can understand why people want to release from it, and I say, well, let's just go crazy for a few years. The roaring 20s, when they came, in part were a response to the influenza pandemic, and here we are again. So
someone posted, I think
I jumped into it.
Someone posted a list of that was printed in a newspaper in the UK for the influenza, and it was like, number 1, wear a mask. Number 2, don't sneeze, or into people, cover your. Number 3, obey the quarantine laws. And it was like, this list was pretty much, it could have been written a few months ago. But I think that these horrible floods and earthquakes and these events that we're seeing climate wise, I think when it comes to COVID, I think people are very quick to move on and want to regain sort of life back as normal. But I think the shocks that we're feeling environmentally, I don't think they're ignorable anymore. So I think that even when we move forward, I don't think we will be going back to how it was in 2019. I think there are things that have happened, and like culturally, politically, with Black Lives Matter, with the environment. I think there are things that have changed, not for the better, but have made us wake up to hopefully forging a better future for humans. I feel like I have to be optimistic, otherwise you just lose complete hope, and that's the worst thing that we can do, because then nothing gets done.
So considering that one of the issues that we've all suffered over the last 18 months is watching people make lots of money and lots of fame out of saying, don't listen to experts, just listen to me, right? You don't need to listen to scientists anymore. And we've seen that on climate change to some extent. We've seen it on the pandemic. Is there something, and I mean this as an agenda, is there something that we can do as the science community to use or to work or engage with the art community, with cultural communities, to say, actually, we're just like you, we just do a different job. We don't have an agenda, we're not all paid off to take over the world here. It seems to me that part of what Space Rocks is trying to achieve is create a more open, engageable kind of environment, which people say, well, I don't like maths, I don't understand maths, I can't go to a science talk. It's like, no, come to a rock concert, or come and listen to people talking about things in your area, about what matters and what the scientific data show you about, what might happen where you are. Make it personal, make it relatable. I mean, or is this just a bunch of middle-class people making themselves feel happy that we're doing something? Are we actually making a difference at all? I don't mean it as a leading question. Have you seen any kind of, for all of these science projects you've been working on, Anna, do you think it's making a difference at all, or is it just, we're just
I think, Ash, did you have something you wanted to say? You look like
you go first.
No, you go first.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think this kind of work again ties back to also that intersection between music and the arts and science, and also I think in documentary and filmmaking, there's definitely been a trend where I feel like scientific documentaries and films have definitely become more mainstream, have, they've reached wider audiences, they've fascinated wider audiences, they've probably become dramatized a lot more. But like even some of the documentaries of the last year, like Seaspiracy, to name one, and loads of others about climate change and before the floods, and all of those have actually gone into a much more mainstream area and reached a much wider audience. And I think it definitely does make a difference, because there's quite a perception, or at least there used to be, about science being maybe quite I don't want to say elitist, because it's not that, but intimidating to people who haven't actually been in contact with it, or didn't have enough of it at school, or were kind of always, it's always kind of put in a separate thing, like, oh, the scientists, or the experts, or the, and that's not your thing to worry about. We leave it to the science. And that kind of, I think, mentality around it creates in itself more of a divide. So I think everything that is done in order to, like you say, just bring it into the sphere of, everyday life and into other realms of culture and art and music and film, but still obviously very much exploring scientific facts and not necessarily just turning it into a theatre show. But I think that definitely enables people to engage with it more and be less intimidated by it, and to listen to the science more, and to actually take on board what is being said, and then translate that to their peers, and to pass on information that they've learned through, experiencing it in different ways. So I think, and especially with also all the stuff that Anna has done, I think it's a useful translation tool of taking it into another world and making it more accessible.
Indeed.
I think there has to be like an acceptance that people's attention span is very short these days. And if you think of like what Trump was really good at, was taking over Twitter, and 140, and Boris does it as well. It's like, you tell a lie, you tell another lie, then you tell another lie. Have I just libeled myself? Maybe. But I think that the idea that you can in very sound bites, and I think that science and people with facts have to counteract that. And the way that you can counteract that is by using people as an artist who are able to make those emotional connections and tell stories. Artists tell stories. And if you look back, back to the cave paintings, or the time people, we comment about the art of humans living in caves. We don't comment on, as much in terms of mainstream. We don't comment as much about the, we use the art of time and generations in order to understand the world that people were living in. And it's the one thing that humans over centuries can make an emotional connection to. And I think more than ever, I think artists have a role in really telling the story of scientists. I really believe that, and making sure that the messages are heard, because you're competing against, Cambridge Analytica. You're competing against politicians who will use the platforms that are out there in order to tell their stories and sort of navigate away from facts. And I think artists can really help tell the message tell the story of scientists.
Yeah. And I wonder if I could pick up on that, actually, because we do have an audience. One of the members, Hank says, well, fair enough. Hank, he's late to the party, he says, and he asks, what does this have to do with space? So
Hank, so right.
But it is all interconnected. So I wondered if we could actually, loop back, continuing on this thread, Anna, to, No Planet B, just like the concept behind it, what that means, and other projects that you're involved in that sort of bring those worlds together. Because I remember getting quite emotional the first time I saw that piece, because the visuals and the music were overpowering, but as you say, they were also true. There was no embellishment. It was simply seeing, well, you can describe better than I can.
Well, Hank, so the reason it links to space is that so the No Planet B was really telling the story, in that 10-minute time frame at Space Rocks Festival. It was kind of like, what do I want to do with that time? Well, I want to tell the story of the work that European Space Agency do. And like I mentioned before, that was totally, my mind was blown on that trip to ESTEC. And I think So what I did was I took the Earth observation. There's so much information on the European Space Agency website. It's absolutely incredible, and so many images and so many and through the images and the videos, and definitely with your help, Mark, navigating that wealth of knowledge and research that's out there, I kind of conducted this sort of 10-minute story in a snapshot to tell the work of the European Space Agency and all of their satellite missions. And that was basically, starting with these really close in the glaciers and the receding ice formations and the glaciers. And it was kind of abstract and really sort of artistic. And it was kind of making that connection between music, art, visuals, the beauty on an abstract level of the information that Earth observation data is collecting. And then it was basically telling the story of like the beauty of our planet was kind of the arc. And then it was kind of, and look what humans are doing, we're destroying it. And then it's like, but wait. And then the satellites would come in, and it's actually, let's use space technology to kind of understand the damage that we've done to this planet, and understand, when I went to the ESTEC, I was blown away by the incredible, I think it was in the antenna room, this huge, vast warehouse, and there was a satellite that was being tested, and it was to test formation of water molecules or in formations of ice, so that when these melted, you could test, you could predict flooding, and you could predict. So this is like incredibly, just the most mind-blowing technology. So I wanted to tell sort of that story, that actually let's use space technology to understand the planet, and hopefully through understanding, we know what to predict the patterns of climate crisis, and also to make changes to make this a more habitable planet. So that was the story. So yeah, and actually the most amazing thing was hearing. It's great to reach to a wider audience, like Aisling, we've all been saying, but actually the most humbling thing is to speak to the scientists who have been involved in the work, and when they feel that the music and the story that's been told does their research justice, but makes them feel emotional about the own work that they do, to kind of take their work, and this is like hours, if you think of the massive work that goes into these missions, and then put it up on stage on a big screen, and then support that with the music, that gives me so much like humble joy. And that was a really incredible experience.
Very well said.
So should we take the opportunity, just to persuade Hank just a little bit more, to talk about what you did this week as well, with respect to the Bepi Colombo flyby at Venus, because I have it queued up, and I think we can probably share the screen if we want to do that. Alex, should we do that?
Sure.
This is another one of your mad ideas. When did we have that phone chat? On Thursday, and you were like, by the way.
Yeah. So no, exactly. So obviously we've known for a long time that Bepi Colombo would be flying past, and we had the previous Venus flyby, and I got involved in helping with some of the image processing work, and the team asked me back to come and help out this week. And we had a team meeting. I think it was Thursday, and then you and I were going to talk anyway. And sort of partway through the meeting, we said, you know what? I've just had this meeting. What about? And then I sent you some simulations of what it's going to look like. And as you remarked today when you saw the movie, it's like, you scientists, you're good. I mean, it looked exactly like the simulations, to which my response was, it's a good thing it did. Otherwise, we'd be out of a job. But
that blew my mind, because you literally sent me, like, the next day, you sent me this like 20-second or 40-second simulation, I think it was like. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, I've got some of your soundscapes lying around that you'd created. So I was like, I'll whack those in, just broke down. And then you sent me, well, then I saw the final, I didn't even see the final one, which went out. I was like, oh my God, it looks exactly like the predicted. Isn't space technology amazing? And computers, the fact that you could predict exactly where this satellite, and the pictures you were going to get back, that really blew my mind. That was really unexpected, actually.
Yeah. And you were talking about this thing about connecting with the scientists. So, when we put the music on the video, and the people had been seeing the images, bit by bit, because they were coming back from space. But then I made the movie yesterday, and we tweaked it around to sort of make a nice sequence, put the music on, and nobody in the team had seen the two together. And I got lots of great emails from colleagues. Some have been on Uplink in the past, and some will come on in the future, and they all said, and the music made it, right? I mean, they knew what the images were because they had taken it, and they're great images, but for them, they were suddenly opened up to the new side of it, in a way. I mean, if they put the images, they say, well, I've seen the images, so it's the images. But here, all of a sudden, is something else which draws you into the story. And I've seen on Twitter, somebody saying it's emotional to see Venus disappearing into the distance, and a piece of music that accompanies that and creates that emotion. You were talking about Aisling, right? I mean, you can enhance, you can kind of put monosodium glutamate on what's actually happening already, with the right music. If you make it too cheesy, then obviously everybody says, oh, I know what you're doing, this is just a lassie film, you want me to cry. But you've got to get the subtlety just right, that you enhance and not overblow. So if I can, let's see, I mean, can play this, it's, what is it, 50 seconds or so, with the Flyby movie. Most people will have seen it already, I know, but if I can grab a hold of that and share sound.
I was in the middle of a forest today when I saw it go out.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about, we were talking about getting away from technology, and you call me from a forest. Leave your phone at home, please.
It did run out of battery.
So let me see if I can put this up, and I don't know, can you see it now? So it's just a blank screen with stars, right? I shall go ahead.
It's incredible. Those pictures are spectacular, and it is really emotional, the idea of like drifting off into space, because it weirdly, you feel connected to the idea of Earth kind of just also drifting away. You feel like you're on the satellite. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about these movies, isn't it? Is that it actually shows the technology, the stuff we built and the stuff we put out there, and the celestial objects. So it's different to just having a picture in a frame that says space. It's like, yeah, us, we're in it. Okay, we're not physically there, but it's much like the astronaut pictures when they're kind of selfie. They're in the picture as well, or the robotic probes that can take pictures of themselves. And most of the agencies do this now, but it doesn't anthropomorphize. I don't think people say, oh, I could be that robot, but they say, well, it's us. We've made it. We've sent it there. It provides that real connection. And I don't know, what you were thinking at the moment, because you saw the simulation. There's the moment where Venus switches from moving around. That's the spacecraft moving as we're changing the orientation. Then Venus starts receding. There's some kind of weird sort of shouty voice there. I'm not sure what it is or where it came from, but one of my colleagues this afternoon said she almost teared up when she heard that bit, because it suddenly just sort of brought an emotion. And of course, you designed it to do that, but if we hadn't put the music on top of it, you would have just seen a dot receding to the distance. So it's remarkable the power that music has. And other people respond to other cues in it, right? The crashing, the booming noises at the moments where the images change. But what was that voice? I have no idea. Where did that come from?
I think that might have actually come from one of your sounds, because I just found a folder that you'd sent. And literally, I think I wrote it at like 5:30 in the morning on Saturday. Whenever you sent me this, I was like, I'll just quickly noodle around, and I found a folder of drones and soundscapes. So, and then there's like loads of vocal layers on top as well. But I was kind of like, well, how do you, because the idea is also space is silent. So the idea, you've got to kind of pretend that space has got to sound like something in music. So it's like, I guess that's the connection with you, is that you are a galactic, professor of space and science and exploration. So you can do that bit, and then the violin and the vocals is like that human connection to Venus, or what our emotional idea of what Venus would sound like. There's so many kind of, if you talk about oh my god, my brain goes. But if you talk about putting gender or ideas of character to certain planets, we have, I was tapping into that in a kind of, in an obvious way with the violin, and something lyrical for Venus, and the idea that you're floating and drifting away. I guess that's what I was trying to capture.
Wow. Very, very effective. So let me, on behalf of the European Space Agency, thank you very much. And the Director General thanked you earlier on as well in Twitter, which I thought was lovely.
Yeah, if he wants Aisling and I to come and do a gig, that'd be great. At I don't know. Any function he's got going, we'll be there.
Absolutely.
Just in his living room, we'll do that too.
Well, I mean, Space Rocks is always a bit of a time warp. but I fully support that. I think that would be absolutely phenomenal. But if I could just ask, as we draw toward a close, so what's next for AVAWAVES? I've heard hints of things that may be in the pipeline. What can you tell us about where to go next?
Well, so we have our next album coming out on October 8th, which is very exciting. And then, as Anna mentioned, we are scoring our first feature film together at the moment, which should also be out later this year. So yeah, it's been exciting, and then we're also playing live again at the Royal Albert Hall Elba Rooms on the 6th of November. Sorry, 6th of November. As part of Knit and Sawney's Journeys Festival, which is celebrating 150 years of immigration for 150 years of the Royal Albert Hall itself. So that should be very, very special. So yeah, there's quite a few things in the pipeline.
Unfortunately, your dates in the Netherlands this weekend cancelled.
I know.
It would have been lovely. But
you're in Poland anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely. You're not going to give us any clues about. Yes, I really am. Don't mind the blue bits, but you completely throwing me off now. Yes, your soundtrack, the soundtrack you're working on. You've been very studious in not telling us anything about it. Is it any hints, or is it all completely?
Yeah, it's a
soundtrack.
It's a surfing movie. So it's about searching for a wave, and it's based on the story of a book these people are reading about. And it's a story about nature as well. Humans conquering or being at one with nature and with the sea and waves. But it's also a very human story as well. So yeah, but I'm not sure how much else we're allowed to say.
So, Point Break 2, maybe. Keanu and Patrick Swayze in it? No.
I'm sure there's going to be more information about it soon, and we'll definitely shout.
I don't want to put you on the spot, because I'm just sort of trying to, we've talked about a wide range of
I think the connection to between nature and humans is certainly a theme.
And you've been practicing your Hawaiian steel guitar, because without that, it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
You've got rubber bass. It's time to crack out that rubber bass.
Finally.
Fantastic. Well, it's exciting stuff, and I hope that there's room somewhere in all of that stuff to fit in future collaborations with Space Rocks, because I know that I'm speaking for Mark as well when I just say it's an absolute pleasure to have you in our dimension of reality, and to have you on tonight as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope it won't be too long before we have you back again.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Mark.
And sorry, we hoped for a surprise guest, but we will keep it. We'll keep it a surprise, and I'm sure they'll turn up next time if they're a busy person, and we'll see. I'll
so
try
upset.
To email her
He's not getting a free vinyl now.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm sure he's very busy. But we have to sign off with a tradition as well, as you probably remember from when you were kind enough to come and do the last time the surprise guest turned up at the ESTEC Open Day last October. And speaking of October, I was out cycling this afternoon. I saw the first place selling pumpkins already. I'm like, really? It's the middle of August. No pumpkins by the side of the road in August. But,
is this in the Netherlands?
Yeah, it's actually.
God, they are weird, aren't they?
It's one particular farm that sells lots of pumpkins. But anyway, but we have a tradition. I think we probably did it in the open day, and that is, of course, that we finish with our hand signal, space, the Vulcan salute, live long and prosper, and rocks. And thank you very much for coming on. It's a pleasure always, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Exactly. I've done this about 900 times, and I have to think about it under the desk before in the concert hall here in Poland, where I am sitting. Exactly.
The acoustics aren't as great as I imagined. I thought there'd be more sort of reverb in that concert hall.
Well, I'll have to bring the microphone a bit closer. But thank you both very much for coming on, and we will be in touch very soon. And good luck with AVAWAVES in October, and also Anna, your album's coming out very soon as well, right? Sea Souls.
Yes.
September the 6th or so. Is that
a lockdown album, but not a pandemic album?
Beautiful, and with an amazing array of collaborators, including a certain person who might be hello on the screen here as well. So I'm very, it's not my career path to be on the same album with Phil Manzanera, but you know, if I have to, right? But thank you very much for that as well. So
thank you.
All right,
Very
we'll
good.
see you soon. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Well then, Mark, talk about time absolutely flying. I mean, I've got to say, the energy of Anna and Aisling is just absolutely phenomenal, and I really feel like we need to just talk about the next things that we might do to bring them into the world of space rocks yet again, because of course it is just so attuned to what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, and Hank, if you're still listening, I mean, you know, yeah, you came in late, and we were definitely on one side of the space rocks business, right? But if you've seen episodes before, we're always talking about the interface between science and space and culture, and the cultural side is, you know, how our artists are making music during the pandemic and how they're going to go back out live again. These are very important things to them. We've managed to keep the space business going, partly because we operate remotely anyway, mostly. But yeah, our friends in the music community have had a very weird time, as many people have, and that's, you know, not exclusive there. So, but yeah, definitely the work we've done with Anna and what Aisling's been doing on documentaries. I mean, there's a huge potential for more collaborative work there, and I'm, you know, really looking forward to doing it.
Couldn't agree more. You know, and well, gosh, if we're wondering what this has to do with space, wait till next week, right? Because we're going to be back with Uplink. Is it Uplink number 58, Mark? And
okay, yeah.
and a world that we haven't really quite yet broached, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah, so we've you know, we've touched, of course, we've had a lot of science fiction. We've talked about a lot of science fiction. It comes up often in the stream. We've had filmmakers, Gavin Rothery and others. We've had actors come in from Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, Star Trek, and Star Wars. And we've explored science fiction in writing as well. So one of our early guests was Alistair Reynolds. But the one area you and I have been talking about for a long time is comics. And of course, science fiction is a huge wellspring of inspiration and ideas. So next week, we're going to have two guests on who are very much embedded in that world. We're going to start with just in order of something. I'm not sure what order I'm putting in, but the first guest is Dirk Maggs. And Dirk works with people like Neil Gaiman on the Sandman audio books, for example. So the Sandman, of course, is a hugely famous and influential graphic novel series that Neil put together years ago, and it's been converted now into, it will go on TV, but there's also audio books. And Dirk also works with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So he knows an awful lot about the comic world and the radio world translated. And the other guest that we have on is Dave Gibbons. And Dave, of course, is very well known for being the comic artist with 2000 AD when I was a kid. But then probably the seminal work that many people know him for is being the artist working with Alan Moore on Watchmen, which is, for me, the defining graphic novel, even to this day. And as much as I've seen the films and the TV series, nothing prepares you for how insightful that book, and it's a book, works through the medium of the storytelling of Alan Moore and the graphics and the invention of Dave Gibbons to draw you into a seriously odd dystopian superhero world. So thrilled to have Dirk and Dave come on the show next week. There's a lot to explore.
It's a lot to explore, Mark, and as ever, an absolute pleasure to do it with you. And thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. Come back next week, 8 p.m. British Standard Time or 9 p.m. CEST. And we'll have news for you then. Sign up to our newsletter at spacerocksofficial.com. Mark, as ever, it's an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, Alex. Good night, everybody. See you soon.